One of the really fun things about woodworking or making anything with your hands really is if you want to make a really absurd single-use item, you can just go ahead and do it. Who's gonna stop you?
What's in that pile?
So somewhere in this pile there's an old Douglas-fir limb that I grabbed up the canyon, and I don't know where it is. I got 2 pieces of Douglas-fir here, and I'm gonna turn it into a tool I'm gonna call a shortbread poker, shortbread sticker, shortbread stabber. I think I'm gonna go with this one. I kind of feel like this has just got some more interesting stuff going on. It also feels like it can't really be turned into much else. This is like a perfect vase making size, so back onto the pile it goes. So, we got this picked out, which means it's now time to head up into the mountains and gather some Douglas-fir needles, and we'll get back to this in a minute.
It's almost April, and as you can see, we're having an insane winter here in Utah. So I figured we may as well just lean into it and make kind of a nice Christmassy wintertime treat. So I'm gonna make some tree-flavored shortbread. Let's take a look around and see what we can find.
Oh yeah, we've got a beautiful Douglas-fir right here. These needles are edible, so this is gonna do really well for us. Now the flavor of the needles can vary wildly from one tree to the next. They can range from super bitter to really sour to just like a nice, refreshing, citrusy flavor. The best ones are always the fresh new growth tips in the early summer, but we're obviously not quite there yet. So anyway, yeah, you wanna test them out first. The best way to do that is to just give it a quick taste while you're out here foraging. This is that one's a little bitter. Maybe take a smaller taste. But the aftertaste is nice. Let's test some other nearby ones, see if we can dial in the right one.
Whoa! Those are way more bitter than the first one. I am getting cold now.
All right, I think these will do. So we're just gonna harvest. We don't need a ton. Just pick a few, spread the love. You don't wanna over-harvest from one place. My hands are numb. If anyone asks you what you're doing when you're out picking Douglas-fir needles, just say, I follow a weirdo on the internet, and leave it at that. All right, I think that's good. All right, we're back. And my hands have feeling in them again. I'll be modifying the America's Test Kitchen recipe for shortbread in a few different ways, but I'm gonna step you through the whole thing. I'm starting with just taking all of these Douglas-fir needles, and I'm gonna give them a rough chop. Now, again, ideally you wanna use the fresh new growth tips in late spring and early summer, those really bright neon green, really soft things. Those chop up really nicely, they have a much mellower flavor. We don't have those, so this might be a failure of an experiment, but listen, when you're eating trees, you just gotta mess around a little bit. This recipe calls for 2/3 cup sugar, and I like to aim for about a 1-to-1 volume ratio of needles to sugar. Does not need to be exact at all. Now you might want to wear gloves for this part, especially if you don't like your fingers getting sticky and stained green, but they smell really good. That's the upside. It smells so good. For most people, I think that they'd prefer to just have regular old shortbread, but I think it's kind of fun to grab a tree that you walk past on hikes and that you've never tasted before and find fun ways to add that flavor into an old familiar dish. I don't know, it's just very fun and exciting to me. So just gonna give it some rough cutting before we blend, just to help it along a bit. I honestly don't know if this step actually helps or not, but it's undeniably fun to chop needles with your kitchen knife. I don't know. It also smells so good. Yeah, it's got this nice light citrus scent to it. Kind of like if a lemon and the notion of Christmas had a baby. All right, let's grab our sugar. So this recipe calls for powdered sugar. I don't think that would work at all with what I'm doing here. So I'm just gonna use granulated sugar and hope for the best. Calls for 2/3 cup. I'm gonna use a little bit more because we are gonna be running this through a fine mesh sieve, and there's a good chance that we're not gonna get a full 2/3 cup of sugar when this is all said and done. I'll be adding just under a cup. Just run the food processor on high, maybe a couple sessions. Just keep an eye on the color of the sugar. Once it looks like it's a nice green color, you're probably good. Again, especially these mature needles, they are so fibrous, they're not really gonna pulverize into the sugar. We're just looking to incorporate as much of the flavor into the granules as we can. In addition to this lovely shade of green and hopefully a nice little flavor, these needles have also released a bunch of water and sap into the sugar, so we're gonna need to dry it all out. I got a baking sheet lined with parchment paper. The best way to do this is just dump this out and then let it air dry until completely dried out. That'll take probably about a day or so, and I'm feeling a little impatient, so the other thing you can do is set your oven to its lowest temperature and shove it in there, which is what I'm gonna do.
Which means it's back to the wood shop to grab a piece of Douglas-Fir wood to make a shortbread stabber, as this recipe calls for punching little holes in the shortbread right after pulling it out of the oven. And it's weird, when I went to the store and asked them if they had a shortbread stabber, they politely yet firmly asked me to leave. This piece of wood is from the Douglas-Fir Pseudotsuga menziesii, more specifically the Rocky Mountain subvariety, as the species is differentiated between it and the coast variety, the Pacific Northwest. The tree, named after botanist David Douglas, is a really beautiful and interesting one. It's not a true fir like, say, the subalpine or silver fir, but its own thing. Hence the hyphen in its name, so it's not like it's a Douglas fir, it's a Douglas fir, if that makes sense. The easiest way to identify a Douglas fir is by its cones, which have these little things sticking out from between the scales called bracts that kind of resemble little mouse legs and tails. And legend has it that a bunch of tiny little mice scrambled into the cones of the Douglas fir to escape a massive forest fire, and well, here they are. Now, if you don't live anywhere near the Douglas fir's native range and you'd like to try this recipe out for yourself, don't worry, you'll get really similar results with a host of other conifer needles like true firs, spruces, and pine trees. Now, the only look-alike to watch out for with these types of trees are those in the yew family, which are deadly poisonous. Their shiny green flat needles can resemble that of other conifers, though their red berry-covered little cones are the dead giveaway that it's a yew. As always, if you're not 100% sure, don't eat the thing that you're not sure about. The cones and needles are always the most surefire way to tell what kind of tree you're looking at. If you're seeing an evergreen tree with needles and scaly cones that look kind of like these, then you've probably got a spruce, fir, or pine tree on your hands. And if you'd like some help telling the difference between those three types of trees, here's a fun little shorthand that'll cover you in most instances. Spruces have sharper needles that roll easily between your fingers. Fir trees have flat, soft needles that usually aren't too sharp. And pine needles usually grow in bundles or fascicles of 2 or more. So, spruces are sharp, firs are friendly, and pines like to party. So if you want to try this recipe out for yourself, make sure you have a Douglas fir, a spruce, a true fir, or a pine tree. Now, there is some concern surrounding ponderosa pine needles being mildly toxic and potentially harmful to pregnancies, though I've read mixed reports there, so just use your best judgment if it's a ponderosa pine. All spruces, true firs, and Douglas firs, meanwhile, are good to go. Speaking of good to go, this stabber poker thing is coming together real nice. The extreme thinness of the wood made the final cuts a little difficult, but stabilizing it with my hand while I cut did the trick okay. I think we've got ourselves a pretty cool looking and very versatile tool on our hands here, so I'm eager to put it to the test. So let's get back to our sugar.
This has been in the oven at the lowest setting for a few hours now. Oh yeah, you can taste the tree. I'm gonna push all the sugar through. There will be little flakes and bits of needles in there, and that is A-okay.
All right, now on to the recipe, starting by blitzing a half cup of old-fashioned rolled oats in a blender or spice grinder until it's a flour. Then add that to a bowl of a stand mixer along with 1½ cups or 7½ ounces of all-purpose flour, a 1/4 cup of cornstarch, 2/3 cup or 2 2/3 ounces powdered sugar, which we're replacing here with our Douglas-Fir granulated sugar, and a 1/2 teaspoon salt. Mix on low with a paddle attachment until combined, and then start adding 14 tablespoons of cold unsalted butter cut into small slices while still on low, Once you've added all the butter, let it continue to mix on low until a dough forms and pulls away from the sides of the bowl, about 5 to 10 minutes. Then spread the dough on the inside of a springform pan, which you've placed upside down on a parchment-lined rimmed baking sheet. Spread the dough in an even half-inch layer, smoothing out with the backside of a spoon, and then use a 2-inch cookie cutter to punch out the center of the dough. Then place that spare little cookie on the side of the sheet and loosen the springform pan, but leave it in place. And finally, this is very important, don't do what I just did and forget to put the cutter back in the center. Put it back there, Justin. Put it in the middle. Come on, you're gonna make a fool of yourself in front of all your friends. Just put it back. Oh no. Okay, bake in a 450 degree oven for 5 minutes, then reduce the temperature to 250 degrees and continue to bake for another 10 to 15 minutes until the edges turn a pale golden brown. As soon as you take it out of the oven and remove the springform pan, start scoring the surface about halfway through with a knife into 16 even wedges. Once you're done with that, it's time to grab your shortbread stabber and poke around 8 to 10 holes in each wedge.
This definitely feels like a first attempt at this recipe, so I honestly don't know how it's gonna turn out. But I will say that the hole poker is doing its job splendidly. Don't let anyone tell you that you can just use like a skewer or a toothpick or just some kind of random object. No. You need this nice girthy handle so you can really stab at it if you feel like it. Poke, poke, poke.
Now back into the oven, which should be turned off, and leave it in there with the door propped open with the handle of a wooden spoon to let it dry for about an hour. Then transfer the baking sheet to a wire rack and let it cool to room temperature for about 2 hours, at which point it's time to cut at the scored marks and dive in.
And I was definitely right. The Douglas-Fir flavor is like a perfect pair for these things. I'm gonna keep fiddling with this, but we're on to something. I think we're on to something.
Definitely let me know if you try this recipe, and we'll see you next time when we find out
What's in that pile?